So in our previous lesson, we looked at just a very basic sort of an architectural wall type setup. Now, there's lots of other types of materials that we can simulate with this architectural material. So for example, let's say we wanted to drop in some glass for the front of this building here, this house. So let's come in here, just move over to the side, right click. Let's drop in a new metal ray material, and again, we'll use the architectural and design material. We can double click on this. Now, if we want to start to make this look a little bit more like glass, we can do a few things. So the first thing we can do is take this diffuse level, bring that all the way down to 0, since glass typically doesn't have any kind of a coloration to it. We can go ahead and bring the transparency all the way up to 1, so that way it's nice and clear. And with the reflectivity, we'll probably leave that pretty close to where it is. That tends to be a pretty good value. But one thing that we will come in and do is if we scroll down under this BRDF, we're going to set this to IOR, or a Fresnel reflection. So a Fresnel reflection is typically the way that a surface responds to in the real world as far as light and reflections. So with a Fresnel reflection, the more directly you look at a surface, the less reflective it actually is. And the more indirectly you look at a surface, so these areas that would be pointing very heavily away from you, those tend to actually have the highest level of reflectivity. And again, that's usually how things work in the real world, to where if you look at a glass surface right almost head on, there's not a lot of reflectivity there. But if you really tilt that glass to the side and look at it from a very heavy angle, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more reflective. So let's take this new glass material, we'll drop it onto our window. And let's do the same up here. We'll drop it onto the second story. And now if we hit Shift-Q and render that out, now we have this pretty good looking glass material. Now, this might be a little less reflective than what we want, so we could always come back and maybe give this a little bit higher level of reflectivity, maybe something like 0.8 or 0.9. There we go, and that gives us now just a little bit better reflectivity in some of these areas right along here. So let's now talk about maybe a little bit different type of material. So if we wanted maybe something that was sort of metallic for some of these rafters and some of these beams up here, metal is a little bit different type of material, so it's obviously going to be solid, so it's going to have a nice strong diffuse color, but it's also probably a little bit reflective. So let's drop in a material for this. So right click, metal ray, once again, we use the architectural and design. We can double click on that. And let's start by picking out a material color. So in my case, I want this to be sort of a nice dark maroon color. So we'll start with kind of a nice deep red. There we are, so something maybe along those lines. Now let's come in and grab these little pieces here for this. Might hit the F4 key on my keyboard to make these a little bit easier to see and to grab. So I'm just going to control click on the roof and all of these little different beams. And I'll also control click on this little piece right underneath there, this little lip. So we can take that material, assign that to our selection. There we go, and that looks like that's everything. So let's render this out and see what that looks like. So as this comes back, you can start to see where we do have this nice coloration, but the reflections are really strong. So let's come back to this architectural material. The first thing I'm going to do is set this to a Fresnel reflection. Again, most objects in the real world obey this Fresnel law, so I almost always use this for any kind of a reflective surface, the exception being things like a mirror surface, or maybe very highly reflective metal like chrome, things like that. So let's now take, with this material, let's bring its reflectivity down quite a bit, since we don't need it to be nearly that strong. And also, since we really don't want any kind of sharp mirror-like reflections, we're going to take the glossiness for this and bring this down. So the lower this glossiness value, the softer these reflections become. So let's start with maybe something like 0.4, and let's re-render this. What I'll do is just simply draw out a region, so that way we don't have to re-render the entire image. So move that over. Let's re-render just that little segment. There we go. That's starting to look now a lot better. So now we get just a little bit of reflectivity here, but it's a nice soft reflection. We could even bring this down a little bit more as far as the glossiness is concerned. There we go. So now we just get something that is just a little bit more subtle compared to what we had before. At least as far as the reflections and some of their softness is concerned. So you can really start to see where this architectural material starts to really become a powerful tool, because you can really simulate almost any kind of material that you can think of. Anything from stone, glass, metal, and really everything in between. So this is a great material to use for almost any and every situation. So as we start to move a little bit further along in this, what I'll start to do in my next lesson is show you how we can start to use some of the color control and color correction features that we have with our materials and our textures.